So this tutorial is about chapters 5 through 7 in a separate piece, and my objective is just to make sure you understand the key takeaways from the chapters. So we're going to go through each chapter. Chapter 5 through 7 is chunked together in a way that shows how Gene is able to exist at Devon without Finney. So in these three chapters, we really kind of see the impact of not having his best friend on campus and what that feels like for him. So in chapter 5, we find out the ramifications of Gene's actions. Gene essentially jounced the limb, and now he has to determine how he's going to handle the situation. So we find out that Finney's leg has been shattered in the fall from the tree, and that Gene then goes to visit Finney, and he has the full intention of telling Finney what had happened. He wants to take responsibility for his actions. And in his conversation with him, he begins to start talking to him, but unfortunately he gets interrupted. So he's not able to kind of come clean, and this is going to weigh heavy on Gene because he really wants to make amends with Finney and be honest with him. He then goes again to visit him at home and tries once again to have this conversation. He does end up confessing his involvement in the accident, to which Finney gets very, very angry. Finney starts off by saying that there was a moment where he thought maybe Gene might have jounced him on purpose, but then he felt horrible because he would never suspect his friend of being able to do such a horrible thing. And then Finney's like, Gene's like, no, that's actually accurate. Like, I really did actually try to hurt you. And Finney gets angry and he says, well, what do you mean? He's like, stop it or I'm going to kill you. And Gene says, yeah, that's exactly how I felt, like that, what you just said there. And essentially admitting that in that moment, he really had wished his friend to be dead. And that's really, a hard thing to admit, but more importantly, that's a hard thing to hear. So Finney gets immediately upset and taken back by that. And Gene regrets in that moment of telling him his truth and realizes that he was kind of selfish by telling him and ends up hurting Finney way more by being honest than he could have ever hurt him by being dishonest. So chapter 5 is kind of a really important chapter for Gene in his, self-discovery of understanding how relationships work and taking honesty and, admitting your truth isn't always necessarily the best thing for the person you're admitting your truth to. So chapter 6 is now we're back at Devon. And we're there without Finney. So he's still in his old room, but he doesn't have a roommate. He volunteers to serve as the assistant crew manager, which is an interesting thing. People have a lot of different ideas as to why he would do that, but essentially it's a major step down. So he's not the manager of the team, he's the assistant manager of the team, which really kind of, lowers his ranking. So instead of taking sports and doing athletics, he's going to help out with this crew team. And in his process of trying to help out with the crew team, he actually gets into an actual physical fist fight with Quackenbush. And he kind of prompts this fight and starts this fight. And essentially it's really his need to want to be kind of punished and get hit for what he did to Finney. So the fight is really kind of more a metaphor of what he's kind of feeling within himself and how he wishes to be punished. He then sees the headmaster who reprimands him for his behavior during the summer sessions. Finney's not there to get him out of this reprimand, so it ends up being a real kind of wake-up call for what life is like without Finney there. Then he gets a phone call from Finney, and Finney is happy to hear that Gene doesn't have a new roommate. And while they don't ever say, hey, are we cool, we know in this conversation that they are in fact cool with each other. And that's important for Gene. Gene needs to know that Finney, forgives him. Finney has a caveat though, and that's that Gene has to play sports. And Finney says, when I get back, I'm going to train you because if I can't play sports, somebody needs to, and I'm going to take you on as my star pupil. And Gene, of course, agrees to this because of the guilt that he feels. Then we have chapter 7, and with chapter 7, we see that new friendships are kind of developing. We have Brinker, who teases Gene that he hurt Finney on purpose to get a single room. Now, this chapter is a little confusing to our students who are kind of like, wait, does Brinker know what happened? And the reality is, no, Brinker does not know what had happened. Gene has a single room, and Brinker's just kind of busting chops, which is, Brinker's personality, and he kind of gets a little too close to the truth. And he, makes an accusation that we know, through dramatic irony, is true, that Gene did in fact do it on purpose, not for a single room, but just because he was just angry. And essentially Brinker's kind of tapping into something. We learn a little bit more about life in the chapter during World War II, we find out that the boys have to do the snow removal because all of the men are overseas. So they kind of have to pick up the hard labor and do some of the heavy lifting that the men would normally do. While they're out doing snow removal on the train tracks, they see soldiers on the train. They kind of ride by on this train tracks, and they get excited about how cool they look. And it's the first time that we kind of see them looking at the appearance of a soldier and kind of thinking that's a cool thing. And then they start talking about the war. And Brinker's fired up. Brinker wants to enlist. And he and Jean are now pretty good friends. And Jean says to himself, I think this is a great idea. It's a great way for me to get a fresh, clean start from, the trauma that I'm carrying around here at Devon. And he makes a mental decision that he's going to enlist in the war. And then we find out Finney returns. He opens the dorm room, and there is Finney. And his plans of entering the war, volunteering for the war, ends upon the return of his new best friend, Finney. And that's the end of chapters 5 through 7.